thank you to those who spoke up. All right, let's just go ahead and get started. I think you've seen kind of this format before. Hold on a second. I want to go to my observation view here. All right. So what we're going to do is just train today on the basics of rule out and refer. And I think you've seen these objectives before, where we want to describe what the LRN and what the rule out is all about, and how to refer those potential hazardous pathogens. It's a step-by-step response. And so you, as our Sentinel laboratories, want to make sure and share those responses with all of you. We are going to kind of demonstrate how that works by talking about the two organisms I sent as unknowns and how you worked through them. We're also going to talk about how we can literally correlate the different reactions with the organisms.
They couldn't hear her, so then she turned her voice on.
Yeah. All right. And I want to correlate the different reactions to the different organisms. This way we can rule it out, and also to correlate colony and Gramstein morphology with the different organisms to make sure we've got a good match. All right, I think you know where to find it, and I highly encourage you. I know you've got the books, some of them being very old, but there's a lot of resources, newer resources out there that you can use. So if you go onto our website, and that side menu will take you right to that particular area just for the LRNB. And when you're on that, and I don't know if the next one shows that. Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of references here that if you have time to look at. Of course, we have had a bench guide in the print for quite a long time. In fact, it's in need of updating. So something we hope to do here in the near future. ASM is the keeper of all the procedures on how to rule out, but these procedures, unfortunately, really provide more recommendations on reagents and tube testing or conventional testing than most of you have in your laboratory. So I realize that in the state of Nebraska, many of our laboratories don't carry a whole lot of old conventional biochemicals. And so that is why every 6 months you get the shipment of the motility of the urease. And if need be, let me know, because I can also provide some of the other things. Most labs have oxidase, have indole, but you might not have beta-lactamase. So let us know what you do have, what you don't have, and we'll try to make sure that you do have these. All right, and so other resources that you can use is something called the new APHL bench guide. This is on our website as well. It is, again, much more, oops, hitting the wrong one, much more detailed, but I think that you can get as far as you can with it, and it'll be quite helpful. All right, but I think the best resource is what used to be called the old CDC Blue Book, which was printed years and years ago. And they have now, with the help of all the state training coordinators in all states, have come up with the new Blue Book. This is fabulous. The only problem is it's 300 and some pages long, and we don't want to print it. So that I think it's important that you make sure and bookmark this. It is a valuable resource and has anything you need to know on these organisms. All right. I thought I'd take a second to, especially for some of our newer microbiologists, to go through how this works. This is literally fashioned after what we call the LPX, which is it is CAP's laboratory exercise exercise, yeah. And what they do is they send the CAP group sends out actually 3 unknowns, and theirs are very good mimics to RBT organisms. Unfortunately, it is expensive. If you are interested in doing the LPX, by all means, feel free to enroll. But those laboratories that cannot do this or do that LPX, what I do is I fashion this, what we call laboratory developed challenge set. And so it is something to be very similar to the LPX. So you've got 2 unknowns, and what you get with each container, you can see you get 2 swabs, you get the case histories for some of them, most of them, and of course it isn't always the best information. You don't know the total history like in real life. It's sometimes hard to dig that out. And a list of identifications that you can choose from. Now, we did not do the last one. I apologize. I forgot to take that particular step off this time. Sometimes we do add special tests. For instance, I might ask you to do a shipper's declaration, not to send the organism, but to do a shipper's declaration if you truly had to send us a category A. All right. So first and foremost, all laboratorians need to remember that these are organisms that can be dangerous. They are not life-threatening like the real thing, but we do highly recommend that they be worked up in the biosafety cabinet, and you need to know the guidelines of using the biosafety cabinet. And there's information in here on doing it. And I thought I would share today too, that Sean Kaufman, who's a big biosafety guru in the real world of laboratory, has some training out on just the biosafety cabinet. And I think he really comes about it a different way. He makes you think about it. He actually has designed the class as a competency. So if you are a manager of a small laboratory, you have a couple of people that need to go through this kind of training, which I highly recommend that you do. MPHL is going to offer a number of laboratories. We're going to see how many we can support for free. So I would like to see if you are interested, and I'll probably contact you all after this for a sign up on that class. It's just an hour plus, because there are a couple of exams involved to cover the competency part. So we definitely need to know how to work with the biosafety cabinet in real life. What we call it is, in your setting, you are working in the BSL-2 laboratory. However, when you have situations like this, you have COVID come up, you have monkeypox, heavens forbid you have a Ebola patient walk into your hospital, and the patient, he or she, is too afraid to say anything. So here you are working with organisms. So we really highly recommend for these situations, and even if you don't know it, maybe to use it as standard precaution, to not only to wear the glove and the gown with the closed front, to also add respiratory protection, something to protect your eyes and your nose and your mouth. So that might be a shield, some sort of a face shield, or goggles, or whatever it takes. Obviously, you know that in our BSL-3, what we have here, we literally have PAPRs, which is the whole headpiece, and oxygen is provided to them. So Obviously, you don't have to go to that degree, but we do ask that you kind of beef up your PPE as you work into that, especially if you are aware of any specimens being more dangerous. And this would be a good example. If you are seeing or finding some of the trigger points, really think this could be a dangerous organism, obviously, you want to take it to the biosafety cabinet. You're going to try not to do any manipulation on the open desk, if at all possible. All right. Well, of course, and then I give you what the scenarios are, and then I truly want you to, make sure that you hit the instructions, that you set this up as right away as possible. And I know laboratory's busy, but it just helps in getting in a real situation. You're going to have to do it right away. This is something we hope we can turn over in 24 hours. Unlike the LPX, when you get an LPX test or proficiency exercise, you literally get a lyophilized organism and you have to subculture it twice, which in the real lab setting is not what you would do on the bench. So what we do with our organisms, we send live organism as a category B, which they really are, but can mimic our organisms. So we ask that you just go ahead and put it into the lineup of your workflow. Go ahead and give it to the processing person, ask them to set it up in the most appropriate way. If it's a blood culture, they should set it up like that. Or if it's a sterile body site, the way ever your protocol has. You'll want to go ahead and do a gram stain on that growth from plate. I mean, I suppose you could even try it from the original swab, because that's what you would do normally in the case of a real specimen. All right. So what we want to do is correlate that gram stain interpretation with the gram stain morphology to make sure everything matches there. And then we start thinking about what we have to do to rule it out. So what are some of the first trigger points? And, there's a whole list of trigger points I could give you, but in reality, I want you to only have to remember these. I mean, because these are the first ones you're going to see, probably, unless you recognize it from the requisition, or if the doctor shares that this particular patient has been hospitalized and may potentially have this organism or something lucky like that. But two things to look for: either it's very, very rapid growth. Let's say you sub it that morning and doctor calls, you peek at it in mid-afternoon and it's really big. Organisms don't grow that fast. So you could have a potential gram-positive rod. The other one that is probably more likely will be a slow grower. This would be the organism like the brucellas, the franciscellas, any of the Burkholderia, Mallii. They're going to be slow growers. They're not even going to show at 24 hours. And so what that means is, think about it. If you have something on gram stain, but no growth at 24 hours, that should be a sign. That should indicate to you that you need to think this through and probably not even touch it on the bench and work on it in the biosafety cabinet. So those are the two biggies: slow growth, rapid growth. And here's the third one. I would say any gram-negative coccobacilli or diplococci that is seen in the direct specimen, just automatically from any spinal fluid, blood culture, any lung tissue, something like that. If there is something in the gram stain in its gram-negative coccobacilli or diplococci, those are the most hazardous. Yes, it could be just a Haemophilus, but to play it safe, I would say just start from there. So that's what we really recommend, is that If you see organism in those two organisms in the direct gram state, please take it right away to the biosafety cabinet. And some of I do share on the instruction page, of course, the bench guides that you can use, the ASM listings. In the final step before, after you work it up, can or cannot rule it out. Actually, when you cannot rule it out is when we want you to call. And the number I've got listed up here, but I would hope that you might have that posted somewhere in your laboratory, that you know this number by heart, because we want you to go ahead and call that number. We are working on the stat pack, and the good news is it's finally, after 2 years being down, we will be visiting you to get your stat packs up if possible. So reporting electronically, I simply do a SurveyMonkey. I apologize for the link problems I had this time, but what that does is it coalesces all the information for me. It makes it anonymous. It doesn't matter whose lab did what, but we talk about it here together. And then, of course, the other calendar dates of when we are going, when it's due, and when it is finally, when we're going to have our review. I do want to point out one thing. This exercise does not satisfy any CLIA or CAP or COLA requirements for proficiency testing. And that is something that you do have as a microbiology lab have to do. But unfortunately, this is not graded, and we don't want it graded because we just want it to be more of a learning session. So you won't be able to use ours. Now, there's obviously other proficiency tests that you can purchase. So, all right, I was so excited that on the completion side, I had 18 laboratories. And right now I had 16 actually reply. One laboratory I wasn't able to contact, and one laboratory who had just gotten, it's a small lab. So one person got back from vacation and hadn't even touched it yet, which is fine. If that happens, I totally understand. And I just asked them to complete it and then watch the review afterwards. So really, we had 17 out of 18 laboratories fully that did or will be doing the exercise. Okay, so we have some general questions I'm going to go through really quickly, and I've never discussed them before, but I think it would be helpful to know why I ask these questions. So each time you do this survey, I will ask you, does your laboratory have clinical laboratory bioterrorism readiness plan incorporated into your standard protocol? Well, this is something that I think is required at least for CLIA, but in reality, you work in microbiology. It should be a no-brainer that you have some readiness plan there in case there's an exposure, in case there's a spill, whatever. And that's something that we can give you just as a template. You just stick your name on the front of the procedure and then put it with your protocol. And if an inspector asks, you've got the readiness. But talk it over with your laboratory and see what needs to be done. Make sure they're all aware of the format of what you need to do, and make sure they exercise it, which this is one of those exercises. Another general question I have is, does your laboratory have a plan in place for documenting potential exposures to hazardous organisms? And this happens on occasion. You can't avoid it. You get an organism, it might be a Brucella, it might be Francisella, and it wasn't caught right away. So it was worked up on the bench. And I think we've all been there, right? Some of us, unfortunately, have even been exposed. And so you just need, again, to have that plan in place. And it looks like a lot of you do. So I'm very happy with that. Now, I also asked the question of, is anybody certified in packaging and shipping and currently certified? Because unfortunately, that certification runs out every 2 years. And so I asked this so that you're kind of thinking about it, our certifications have all run out, might need to take training. I do offer for brand new employees a class. In fact, it's just next week. I just put that email out though, so I realize that might be hard to schedule. It's a long class, it's 8 hours. Once you're certified though, after 2 years, there are a number of different ways that you can recertify. There's a 2-hour class, there's other types of training that you can do. So we want at least one person per lab, at least one person. It would be nice to have 2, because if that person's on vacation, then you've got backup, or you're going to have to be calling them when they're in the Caribbean islands or wherever they're vacationing. 3 or more is even better. Are all personnel performing or interpreting gram stains and culture plates? Are they all trained in what we call the LRNB, rule out and refer protocol? And that's what we're going to go through today. So it appears that quite a few are. And if you don't have, we do hope that we can get some training to you, be it Zoom, be it a live wet workshop. If we come to your site, we'll do anything we need to get you trained. All right, so let's go ahead. You guys need to cut me off. I mean, it's 1:26 now. So I'll give this about 15 minutes and then wave at me so I can go to number 2. So number 1 was a 2-year-old male that had an abscess, and that's all they told us. I have to tell you, this was a real patient that came to us as a laboratory who was unable to rule out. So 2-year-old, and the source was blood. More than 1 bottle was positive, so sometimes that can be significant. Unfortunately, this is my placeholder. I always like to share gram stains, and that's just something we didn't get done this time. But I hope as we get back to Stat Pack, you guys will be sharing your gram stains with me, and I can share those with you then. What you tell me though through the survey is that 16 of or 93% of you, 94% said it was gram positive. I did have 1 person that said gram negative. So what probably happened here? Can anybody share with me? And you're welcome. If you don't have audio, put it in the chat box. Where's my chat box? Oh, I can't find my chat box. Here's more. Okay. So, oh yes, I realize a lot of you don't have. Thank you for putting your names in the chat box. Yes, Brad, we do think that it would probably over decolorization. And I think you'll find that this is actually quite common with this organism. So it happens, and you have to, what is one way that you can figure it out that it really was not a gram negative? Right? That's okay, Colleen, no problem. And I apologize, I called you Kathy, so I know better next time. What can we do to recognize decolorization, over decolorization? What can a microbiologist use? Does anybody have any ideas? How about the size of the organism? Because those organisms that do decolorize tend to be your larger Clostridiums and things like that. Okay, moving forward. So, and interestingly enough, and a majority of you described it as being chain spores. even possibly capsules, boxcard shape, large, boxy, possible spores. So this is very telltale. That gram stain in itself can give you a lot of ideas. So what did it grow on? Majority of you said yes, it grew on blood and chocolate. And I had one person that said it grew on McConkey. So this one should not grow on McConkey. And no big deal if you actually experience something growing on McConkey. This is what I would do. I just go back and see if possibly we got it contaminated. Might have something in there. Did anybody see any other or any organisms growing that they shouldn't be, that it was contaminated? Yes, no. Did you all have pure culture? Thank you, Jenna. Yes, and Jenna from Faith said that they had pure culture. Glad to. All right, excellent, excellent. But you know what? It could happen. It could, maybe it wasn't in the specimen, maybe it was on the plate and then just got spread. So think about that too. Those two things really don't match up. If you were thinking gram positive, of course, this could be the one person who had gram negative. So we'll go from there. Okay, hemolysis. That's the next thing you're going to look at, is you want to see if this organism is hemolytic or non-hemolytic. So, and that's a big deal, because the organism that is dangerous is going to be non-hemolytic. Anything beta hemolytic, you can automatically rule out. And that is how it works with our flow chart that we're going to go through in just a minute. All right, so, you know, just in the few minutes that we've been talking about it, the organism, the trigger points, we don't know about. Well, we know it's a sterile site, but we don't know if the patient's hospitalized. That is information it would be interesting to dig out, to talk to the physician. If you're not able to rule the organism out, you're going to have to talk to your physician anyway. So call them ahead of time, get more information, and see if that can help you in the rule out process. That growth rate, how long did it take? Was it a rapid grower? Was it a slow grower? And then that colony morphology. So it's all described in both of the bench tops in what they call their workup tables. And that's usually like a summary of. So reviewing ours, you can see that the large gram-positive rods, the one organism that you need to be concerned about is Bacillus anthracis. So you think about it, what was in the gram stain? It was chaining, it was large, boxy, it showed spores. In fact, it describes here that the gram stain of the culture itself, from culture, may show subterminal or centralized spores with no significant swelling, of the cell. So what's that mean? You've seen these weird gram-positive rods that have these bulbous ends. They look like lollipops. I think we've seen them before. They might be a little bit smaller, but if you see that, you know it's not a Bacillus anthracis, because anthracis would never do that. It would stay boxcard shape. It would never change the size of the cell. So, but it does decolorize easily. So the one person who said that, it would make sense. Okay. What testing was done? Well, I'm going to go down the list. I think it was just put alphabetically. So I don't have the key here, but yellow. I remember right. Let me go on to the next one. Yellow is not appropriate. Blue is negative, and green is positive. So going back, beta-lactamase, a majority of people felt that it was not appropriate to do it. Now, let's talk about that for a second. Yes, there's a lot of different biochemicals listed in those books, but are you doing every one? No. Think about back when you were a student. More than likely, your teacher would say, you don't do every biochemical in the book. First of all, it takes too much time. Secondly, you work from the workflow charts to see what is appropriate. And if you try to do everything, you could be misguided, and that will get you off track. So here, everybody felt that green was appropriate, sorry, not green, catalase was appropriate, and that it was positive for them. Indole, they said not appropriate. Motility, interesting, at 25 and 35, okay. Well, for all normal purposes, for bacillus, you only need 35. So that's why you see a yellow on the tube at 25 or room temp. And then the blue was, or motility at 35. A majority of people said it was non-modal. Now, the nice thing about bacillus, either it's very modal or not modal at all. It's not one of these iffy ones. So you see any hint of cloudiness to your tube, you have to call it modal. This particular organism was not modal. Oxidase, a majority said it was not appropriate, and it's true. You only do this oxidase on gram-negative rods, and same with the urease. They are not appropriate. So there's kind of another breakdown of all the different groups and what they were doing. And I think it's pretty safe to say a majority of the people probably just did that motility at incubator temperature and the catalase to be safe. All right, and so I think a majority of you too were able to identify this as suspicious Bacillus anthracis. And that's where we don't want you to go any further. We don't want you trying to do any additional testing, and God forbid do any sensitivities or MALDI-TOFs or any automated tests. And the reason for that is because they can aerosolize and you potentially could be exposed. So I think a number of you guys all did pretty good. This was an organism, as I said, we actually got from one of our laboratories, and the girls working it up in the BT lab said that this was probably the most alike mimic we've ever gotten. And I thought so too. So thought it would be a good one to share with you guys. So glad that worked out. Okay. So unable to rule out Bacillus anthracis is the, should be the answer. If you felt otherwise, please let me know. We'll walk through it. The actual organism, unfortunately, I did not speciate. We just know it as a Bacillus species. Okay. Any questions on number one? Did anybody want to go through why their motility didn't work or why their gram stilling didn't work? Or do you feel pretty confident that you understand what happened? All right, nothing to be ashamed of it. It's just practice. Okay, we're going to go on to number two. Now, this one I had a lot more information on. I gave to you too. 14-year-old female was admitted to the hospital with localized fever, had abscesses, cough, chest pain, and abdominal pain. Eventually, she developed seizure and brain infection, and it proved fatal. So the specimen was collected on the 25th, flagged positive on the 27th. Okay. So right there, we know a growth rate, right? It is probably about 2 days. That's not necessarily unusual, I suppose. This one was a blood culture and all bottles positive. Now, I have a gram stain from a previous exercise, so I did save that. looks like this. I apologize, it's a little dark. Something had been taken with our stat pack. And you can, on the stat pack, play with exposure and make that a little lighter if it's hard to read. But you see that some of these organisms are very definely gram, they're very definely rod shaped. All right, now some of them are not. Some of them are maybe a little bit more rounder than you would like, but let's look at it as a picture as a whole. It's pretty much all gram negative rods. And a majority of you said that. 1 gram positive, did this organism not decolorize properly? A way to get around that probably is to look around your whole slide. Was it truly gram positive all the way through the slide? Sometimes you have to look at like 25 colonies to get, or 25 fields to get a good representation of what your gram stain should be. So don't just look at the first area that you put under the scope. Look around. Everybody said it's a bacilli, so we're good there. This is what it was described as: palisading, pretty average looking gram negative rod, long and thin. There are a number of other responses, but if you look at that gram stain, yeah, it is a pretty normal gram negative rod. But I know how it can be when you're doing a gram stain. Obviously, it's easier to call it after the fact. Sometimes you don't know about those other organisms. Well, if there are other organisms in there, if they're the same thing or not, but they're different shapes. So you really have to think it through. Now, there's 2 families this could be in. So, and I call them families because I want you to start thinking about, okay, I got a gram negative rod. Now I have to decide what family it belongs to. One family is what we call the real small gram negative rods, or the gram negative coccobacilli. That includes your Francisella, your Brucella, and your Burkholderia mallei. Okay, so we could kind of go through them and compare growth rates. We can compare different growth characteristics. Did it grow on blood or not? And you notice a McConkey, a majority of these do not grow on there. But, you know, I think a lot of people have tried to hone in on, does that gram negative organism, is it small like a coccobacilli, or is it just a small gram negative rod, or is it a real regular gram negative rod? It's been hard for some people to do that, especially if they're generalists and not familiar with and don't do a whole lot of gram stains. Now, the other family that you can think about are the true gram negative rods. That includes your Burkholderia pseudomallei and your Yersinia pestis. All right, there are some key characteristics we can talk about there. They're listed there. And as you can see, they can be what they call safety pin looking. That's not something that you can really identify it all by itself by. It's not real predictable, but sometimes it can be seen. The other thing too, not many people realize is these 2 organisms really do grow a McConkey at the same rate as the blood and chocolate. And the reason I bring that up is because one of the newer pages in the APHL handbook bench guide is this, and I love this because what it's doing is it's not asking about what gram stain you think it is. It's asking you if right away tell me, is it growing on McConkey? And I think this is a better way to definitively decide which family you're in. So I think that works. So we'll talk about the fact that you did have growth on McConkey for this unknown, and that puts you into the field of the gram positive, or excuse me, gram negative rod, true rods. So Okay, how are we doing on time? We had some interesting colony morphology with this, kind of wrinkled per se. Everybody said it was a non-fermenter. One person said it was a fermenter, but it kind of depends. You know, if you're looking at the pink in the auger itself, I don't know, sometimes there can be toxins that are released to make it look kind of pink versus the organism itself looking pink. Okay. And so that does put us into the family, as I said here. So what is the one thing that you could do to separate these? What biochemical can you do? It's the first one you do anyway. Can anybody tell me? Write it on chat. Put yourself on unmute and be brave. Yes, thank you. It is the oxidase. So let me skip back. We'll talk about protocol here, but that oxidase here, I'm going to show you the difference between the Burkholderia pseudomallei and the pestis. So right away, you can look at these two flow charts. The first biochemical you see should be that oxidase. Oxidase negative for Yersinia, oxidase positive for the Burkholderias. And if you aren't aware of it, Burkholderia is the new name for some of the Pseudomonases. You no longer see Pseudomonas cepacia. It's now called Burkholderia cepacia. So this should be oxidase positive, okay? All right, so going back as a review on biochemicals, you know, that oxidase can be very subjective. A lot of people might have problems with it. You need to be very careful not to drown it out. You put your organism on, and maybe there's so much liquid concentrated in the center, it could drown it out, and you could get a false negative. But if you take that organism and kind of lead it to the edge and outside the wet area, you get a better reaction on the end. I think you are familiar, of course, the motility, negative versus positive, same way with urease. We ask you to look at your ureases if you do it right at 1 hour, 2 hours, because that will identify your brucellas, but that's not even the same family right now. And one test that not many people carry anymore is the beta-lactamase, and that does help identify our Francisellus. The other one that I've been really promoting is doing the catalase by a tube method. I know you're very used to the slide, and you just put a drop on an organism. But if you're thinking about it and how you're putting your face right down and to see and look for bubbles, you are aerosolizing right into your nasal area. So we recommend, even in the biosafety hood, still doing the tube method. You add a couple of drops to the bottom of your tube. You rub the organism on the side of the tube, inside of the tube, but you do not mix them. So it's only after you cap it that you run the liquid over the organism, and it should bubble really well for you. Almost easier to see than the slide. So with this organism, again, beta-lactamase was not appropriate. Catalase was done. And some people did do the indole and had a positive. Motility at 25 was not appropriate, but 35 was done, and modal and the oxidase was positive. So right there tells us we can rule out the Yersinia, right? So we should be thinking at this point about our Burkholderias. More than likely, the urease should be negative, yes. Okay, so what are our trigger points? Let's think about this. Even before we did the biochemicals, it's a sterile site. This patient was hospitalized. This is a slow grower, although your unknown probably wasn't. I'm thinking we here had good growth at 24, didn't we, Becky?
Fairly good growth, I thought.
Yeah. So that is that a possible thing that we can say, okay, it grew so well, we can rule it out? You know, most Burkholdeриas are not going to grow this well. It just so happened our mimic grew this well. It was oxidase positive, catalase positive. So that really does put us into this flow chart. We've completed the first part, and the first two reagents. So now, taking it just one step further, if you're not able to rule out yet, and you did have slower growth and didn't trust it, you could do an indol. You could do that motility if your indol was negative and motility positive. Well, then you have not been able to rule this out. I don't expect people to do the arginine, which is what the ASM manual would tell you to do, or 42-degree growth. Some of our bigger hospitals in Omaha may be able to, or Kearney, maybe you guys are able to, but you know, I'm learning every day that some of the bigger hospitals don't even do the 42-degree growth anymore. That just takes a special incubator. Okay. So a majority of you were not able to rule it out, that you do suspect either some sort of Burkholderia. Some of you, Malii. There is a chart, I forgot to add it in here, that looks at the differences between the two, and I should send that out to you after the fact. Some of you were looking at this as a gram negative coccobacilli. Some called it a Francisella or a Brucella. What could you have used to rule those two organisms out, or to know that you were not on the right path? Go back to your McConkey again. Was this organism growing on McConkeys? If it was, you should not be calling it a Francisella or a Brucella. Now, maybe you didn't have growth, and so then we just need to find out what happened there. Okay, so looks like it grew for everybody. This particular organism was a Burkholderia stutzeri, and sometimes can very much mimic the Burkholderia pseudomallii. So why is this organism important?
How is it?
And well, anyway, so interestingly enough, it was just a year ago that I think NPHL sent out a notice that we had 4 states, neighboring states, that had a cluster of outbreaks on it. Kansas, Minnesota, and of course, Texas and Georgia, not neighboring necessarily. But they had a case of the maliodosis. Is that how we decided to pronounce that? But what happened, out of these 4 cases, 2 people did die. And that is significant. This was published before they finally found the real reason. But the next articles did say that they found that it was a spray. It was a lavender spray, and it came from outside the United States, and it was sold at Walmart. Obviously, once they determined that all 4 of the patients, this was the only common thing that they all used together, then they were able to identify this. Now, I thought, you know, I've always taught under the assumption that this organism is something you never see in the United States. And, but this is, the first 4 we've seen in a long, long time. We do know that it was seen back when the Vietnam veterans came home, and sometimes it would carry in their body up to 20 years, and we would see it in the 90s. And I just assume we haven't seen it, but since then. But I am finding out that this is starting to be a locally endemic thing, especially in Mississippi, along the Gulf coasts there. They're starting to see more and more just individual cases, and might just be a one-on or something like that. So that's why travel is also, even if you're just asking if they traveled, in the United States versus traveling outside the United States, these are good questions to ask, because if they come from an endemic area, aren't you going to want to know? So this organism, unfortunately, what happens is some people don't think about the growth rate, and so they might throw it on the MALDI-TOF or the VITEC, and with that, they're going to get some really weird identifications. If you come up with identification of, let's just say, Burkholderia species, like a Cepacia, like a thailandensis, excuse me, Chromobacterium, violaceum, or an Ochrobacterium. What's the other ones? They say Pseudomonas, but we've got a million Pseudomonas out there. I don't know if, obviously if you have a mucoid Pseudomonas and it's pigmented, no, you don't have to identify it. But if it's a nice clear one, you might want to consider doing the rule out. Same way with the Acinetobacters and Aeromonaces. So we're recommending that you put big signs up on your MALDI. What was your growth rate? As a reminder, that you have growth at 48 hours. Don't put it on the MALDI. And that if you do put it on the MALDI and you come up with these identifications, the next thing you should do is probably turn around, go to the biosafety cabinet and do the rule out, just to make sure you've ruled it out, that it was safe to put it on the MALDI-TOF or the VITEC. If you put it on those instrumentations, it's going to be considered an exposure, and that kind of exposure is reported to the CDC. And so you might get some phone calls, and that's why we really don't want you to, we want you to think about it first, what you put onto the MALDI. All right. Why can I move this again? All right. Here I'm just sharing where endemically this is. And like I said, we probably need to put a little bit of purple on the Gulf Coast area and Mississippi as well, too. Very much so in Australia. Yikes. Okay. With that, I won't go through it right now, but the symptom, for time's sake, I won't go through the symptomologies, but this is, of course, is something if you can get the physician to say what the symptoms are and what their travel history is, maybe you can pull this together. This is kind of the history of this organism. I mean, it's been seen back in the early 1900s, and we definitely saw it through the Vietnam War. And then, of course, there's finally back in 2012, was it called what we call a select agent. And that's really why we call it a BT organism, because any select agent can be used for bioterrorism, but more than likely, it's just something you're going to see endemically. All right, so that's for your reading if you need any references. Okay, NETEC put out a really great article on decoding Burkholderia that I will share with you. I'll put these out in an email afterwards. I had the poster, but it was such bad print that I decided not to share it. All right, so just the reminder again, to be very careful to do your rule out process before you put it on any automated systems. Okay, so we want to know if you learned anything from this. if you didn't learn anything from this, but we are happy to give out that credit hours. Now, if this is not live yet, I'll make sure it's the right one when I send it out, but you'll get credit for this once I put that live. So as soon as you get an email, I will, you can just click on that, fill out a couple of questions, give us your advice. We want to know what we can do to change this, to make it more interesting. So any last minute questions for you? We're right at the hour again, and you're a very quiet group, but I appreciate anything that you shared with us on chat. So last call for questions. Any more? Hold on a second. I've got to do one more thing. Where is my on chat box? Would you guys all make sure you have your names? This is going to be my attendance list. If you could do that. And I think I don't have anything else. So if no questions, we'll say good afternoon. So, 2 new messages. Yeah. Thanks for putting your name in. Appreciate it. All right. Take off. Take care. All right.